Today we are going to make a very fun, at least I think it's fun, slimline card that features several of the products that are part of the Flowering Fields suite. And what I really like about this slimline card is it's more than a card that, opens horizontally like a book. This is a gatefold card, and it has a nice little image on the inside, a lot of color. It really does use a lot of the products that are in the suite. I've got several of the stamps from the Tulip Fields stamp set, which I'm falling in love with. And then I used a couple of the dies from these are called Windmill Fields dies. And we're going to see I used the clouds, the fence, and one of the dies for the windmill. But what I want to do first is I want to work on the focal point. And that is going to be the area that I'm going to concentrate on the stamping, which will include ink blending and stamping. And that's what I'm going to do first. And then I'll move into the construction of this card. And there are several layers that are put together into a slimline gatefold, and we'll talk about that as we put it all together. And then finally, we're going to add some embellishments and a sentiment and a couple of other things on the front. But let's jump in, and like I said, we're going to start with designing that focal point. Now, this is a tool that I have, and I'm not trying to push any products, but let me kind of talk to you about what I'm going to do and why I chose to use this to start with. The focal point piece starts as a piece of Whisper White, actually no, basic white cardstock that is cut to 3 inches. And the focal point is the one that has all the stamping and ink blending. So it's 3 inches by 8 inches. And it is going to include ink blending and then stamping. And what I wanted to do, this is my 3 inch by 8 inch piece that's under these little pieces of Post-it note, is I wanted to mask off an area on that piece of white so that I can ink blend the sky. And in order to do that, I needed to have a fairly straight line because I wanted to create a horizon that the field of tulips is going to disappear into. You can really see it better if I open this up. And the way I did that is I masked off the bottom, and then I'm going to do some ink blending on the top. And in order to mask off the bottom and attempt to get a straight line, I used Post-it notes. And this tool, it's called Make Art, and it's available on Amazon and some other places. This is a magnetic board, and it's just really nice because it allows you to put things down and hold them where you want them to be. It allowed me to get that piece of paper down and allowed me to make sure that my Post-its are fairly straight. I decided that I wanted about 1 inch at the top for my sky and about 2 inches at the bottom for the field. And you don't have to be super precise, but I just wanted it to be about 1/3, 2/3. And you can see what the result of that is in terms of spacing. So after I masked off that area, then I'm going to I chose Pool Party and one of the blending brushes. And I'm just going to do a little bit of ink blending to get the sky. And nothing super fancy with this. What's nice too about the Post-it notes is with these extending over the side of that card, it's holding the cardstock on top of the paper that I have there. So nothing's going to move around. And it does take just a couple of times to get your brush inked up before you really start getting the bristles saturated and the color going on your paper. And I'm just blending off a little bit. And what I'm not going to do, and I'm not doing this purposely, I am not trying to get a completely blended background, because I want the sky to look like it has areas that are a little whiter, areas that are a little darker. It just is going to give it a more interest than if I went in and I really did a thorough job of trying to get my sky to look completely the same in terms of how dark the blue is and if there are any little splotches. And if I get a splotch like that one, I don't care. I really don't, because the imperfections are really going to add some character. The one thing that I am going to do is I'm just going to go right by where the Post-it note is, because I do want that horizon to show. So I'm really especially going through and making sure that right at the edge, right where that Post-it note is and where my paper starts, I'm going to make that a little bit darker, and I'm doing that intentionally. So I'm just coming in and giving that a good press. What's nice about this too is obviously I can just lift up the Post-it note and see how it's going. See if it's giving me the distinction, and it is. I can see where that horizon is going to be. And when I'm happy with where that is, I'm just going to give a little bit more on the horizon. I am going to take my Post-it note off and simply change the orientation. And I'll show you what I'm talking about. So I am done with my pool party. I've done the blending for my sky. The next step that I'm going to do is I'm going to, and you'll see me do this in a minute, I'm literally going to flip how those Post-it notes are. And I'm going to put a little bit of green underneath where I'm going to stamp these tulips. Now, I've seen a lot of beautiful cards and other beautiful projects made where folks who are doing the stamping leave their background white and they stamp their flowers on top of the white, and they look great. What I wanted to do, since I wanted to make the sky look like sky blue, is I wanted to add a little green before I put the flowers in, because in my opinion, it looked a little, maybe a little bit more realistic. It added a little bit of green to the field and made it look like the flowers were growing in a field of grass. So now I need to mask off the blue, because I'm going to be putting color on the other side. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring that mask so that I can barely see the blue. I want a smidge of that blue showing. And that will make sure that I don't have any gaps of white that are going to be left on the card. And then I'm just going to bring the second Post-it note over and put that down. So I just reversed the mask, and this is going to stay on for a little bit because I'm going to leave this mask on when I do the stamping of the flowers, because this stamp is far too big to put on the bottom, and I'm going to need some masking. For the grass or the field or whatever we want to call it, I chose to use Just Jade. And I'm probably going to experiment with some greener, more true to green in terms of grass than Just Jade, but I liked how these two looked together. And if they blend together in that little area where I've purposely left the blue showing, the color is going to be okay. So that's why I decided I was going to use Just Jade on this. And I'm not going to be particular on this ink blending either. because I'm going to be filling that field with a bunch of flowers and a bunch of colors. So if it doesn't look perfect, or if I get areas like this where there's more color and then there's white and I keep going, I'm okay with that, because if you look at a field, you are not going to see the same green throughout. You're going to see different shades. And you will, at least in my opinion, create something that might look a little bit more real if you don't try to make this perfect. So I'm just putting this on, and I'm not going to overthink this. And I'm not really going to put as much color on the bottom, on the area that I'm doing now, because I'm going to be stamping over this. And I don't want to get that green so dark that some of the colors that I'm going to use for the flowers are not going to stand on their own over the green that I'm putting on. And that's about all I'm going to do. So you're going to see that there are some imperfections in there. And let me bring the card back in, because you're going to see that there are imperfections in the green that I used on that as well. And you may or may not agree with me, but I think it looks a tad bit more realistic if you leave it a little bit imperfect. All right, we are moving now to the point where we are going to be stamping the flowers. And the stamp that I'm going to use for that, and I'm going to use this multiple times, is the one that looks like this big piece of pie, piece of pizza, whatever you want to call it. And it's meant to really give you the illusion of a horizon of flowers, so that the point, this is in the distance, and the flowers become larger in size on the front end. This is designed so that you can make slices, if you want to call it that, and then you're going to move the stamp and put in additional rows and additional rows. You can actually use this to go all the way around and make a circle if you want to. For those of you who know me well, it is very unusual for me to be using a stamp with an acrylic block. I tend to gravitate toward a stamparatus rather than acrylic block stamping. But in this case, it is much, much easier to get things going if you have a block. And this one is the letter I block that Stampin' Up! Has. And it's a really nice kind of vertical, thin block that works really well with this stamp. So what I tried to do when I started stamping this, and I'm going to open this card up, is I wanted to get that middle row of flowers in the middle of this piece for a couple of reasons. Visually, I thought it would look good. And I'm going to try and duplicate the pattern going out to the right and out to the left. And that meant that I really needed to try and center this. So let me show you how I did that. Not mystical or magical. I'm going to bring in a piercing mat. And I really like these for times when I am using acrylic blocks and photopolymer stamps. And the reason is, when you've got a photopolymer stamp and you're stamping, you don't have that cushion. If you think about the rubber stamps, there's a cushion. Well, the piercing mat is perfect because when you press down on it, it has a little give. It's also a nice size. So I'm going to put my piece that I'm going to be stamping on. And because I'm using that Post-it note, it's not going anywhere. It's nice and fixed. And I'm just feeling where that piercing mat is. So it kind of comes to here and it comes to here. And that's going to give me a lot of nice room to stamp on. And what I'm going to do, and you guys are going to think that I've lost my mind, but you know what? That's okay. I'm cool with that. I'm getting a ruler. And I want to kind of gauge where that center is, because I want to try to do my best to get that center lined up, that the center flower lined up in the middle. I know this is 8 inches long, so I'm putting a little tick mark at 4 inches. And then I'm coming down here and off the sheet, not on the piece where I'm stamping, but off that sheet, I'm just going to put another little tick mark at 4. And then, yep, I'm a crazy person. I'm going to draw a line. And again, I'm not going anywhere near the piece that I just did all that ink blending. But now I've got a pretty good visual of where I can put that stamp. So it's about in the middle, right? Because I'm going to get it so that tip is in the middle and the bottom is about in the middle. And then I'm going to build. And what's nice about this is I can choose where I want that to start. I'm creating a horizon. So I don't want the tip, the end, to be on the piece that I am masking off. So I'm going to make sure that the tip of those flowers is over on the Post-it note. And that way it's not going to end up on the piece that I just ink blended. So then the question is, what colors? Well, I got out what I think is a really interesting combination of colors that are nice and bright and will be really fun to use. So for the field of tulips, I'm going to use Poppy Parade. I'm going to use Pumpkin Pie. And I'm going to use Rich Razzleberry. And they may not be a combination that is something that really would be ones that you might want to use, but at the end, it was actually kind of fun. And I am going to start with Poppy Parade. And I'm going to put that right down the middle. So I'll get my Poppy Parade out. And when you are using photopolymer stamps, we all know, just do a good job inking them up. Make sure that when you are inking them, and especially a stamp that's long like this, that you just go up and down and you get some good coverage of that ink. You can turn it over and you can see if you have the ink on there. And then I'm literally going to stand up and I'm going to put this as close as I can in the middle and then give it a nice push. And it's not like I'm doing a major workout, but I do want to give it just a nice little push. And then I'm going to bring that up. Now, one of the things that comes in really handy when you are doing a project like this is a stamp cleaner. And this looks like a total disaster. It kind of is, but it's also an absolutely wonderful tool. And I have been using this stamp cleaner. It's in the annual catalog. I've been using this quite a bit lately. And even though it looks like a mess, it is easy to just wash off underwater, and then you can use it again and again. And I'm just gonna make sure I get everything off, which I did. And I'm going to bring out my next color. And the next color that I'm going to use, I'm going to replicate this just because I like the way the colors worked. I'm going to use Pumpkin Pie. So I'm going to bring my Pumpkin Pie in, and I'm going to do the same thing in terms of inking up my stamp. So again, just making sure that I get really good coverage, even though I'm not going to use the entire stamp on this image, because we're going to lose some on the top, we're going to lose some on the bottom. I want to make sure that my piercing mat is completely underneath where I'm going to stamp. And then I'm going to take this stamp and I am going to hold it over the top of the paper. And what I'm trying to do is line up the points at the top and the corner at the bottom and just eyeball about how wide apart they are. And then give that a good push. Just to make sure I'm getting really nice imprint of that color. And then I'm going to grab my cleaner one more time and take that off. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to create the mirror image on the other side first. And this is where it's up to you. If you feel more comfortable and you would prefer to continue going on this side to get everything done, go for it. But I'm going to switch sides. I'm going to grab, in this case, it's the rich raspberry. And I'm going to come in and add the next field of flowers visually on my left. And I'm trying to mirror where I put that field where I use the pumpkin pie. Now, obviously, if you don't have this stamp set, there are an unlimited number of possibilities for you to use other stamps and create whatever kind of design you want. I did want to spend some time using the stamp set just to give people a little bit of an idea of how to use it. And I'm really careful to make sure that I get some good ink on that stamp, especially in the middle of that field. And what I'm going to do is just like I did on the other side, I'm going to line up that tip. I'm going to line up the bottom. And then I'm just going to put that down and give it a good press. And the result is going to be that the distance between the two rows, when I look left and right, maybe a little bit different. But when you think about the realism of a field of flowers, nothing is going to be perfect. So now I have my beginning point. I'm going to clean this off again. And this is just, I love this little squeegee because, or chamois or whatever we want to call it. It's so quick and it really does a nice job. And if you're wanting to be absolutely sure, you can just take that off. All right, well, my pattern repeats where I do rich raspberry, poppy parade, rich raspberry, excuse me, poppy parade, and then the pumpkin pie. So now I need to go back to the rich raspberry, and I'm going to put that slice over here. Now, what's interesting is since we are working on a piece of cardstock that is wider, much wider than a normal A2, we're going to have to alter the way that this next one is angled. Let me show you why. If I bring up my stamp and I do what I've done on the other two, there's going to be an awful lot of space in here where there aren't any tulips. So what I'm going to do on this one is I'm going to adjust this stamp so I can get the most flowers possible and still make it look reasonable. So I'm trying to aim to see how much I can cover down in this area, but also make sure that I don't get the tip onto my cardstock. I still want to make it look like it's in a horizon. So here I'm going to angle this. I'm really looking at where I stamped the pumpkin pie. I want to get that side as close as I can and see how I'm trying to get as much as I can down at the bottom. I'm just going to put that down. Give it a nice little push. And I was able to cover quite a bit. Only have a little bit showing right down at that bottom. So now I'm going to do the same thing in terms of I'm going to mirror over on this side. And that means that I am going to use the pumpkin pie. and I'm going to try to get as close as I can to mirroring the way that this stamp looks on the opposite side. And for right now, I am done with my rich raspberry, so I'm just going to put that away for the moment. Going to grab the pumpkin pie again and ink that up. And double check just to make sure, especially in the middle. It's where I tend to miss if I'm going to miss where I've got ink coverage. I'm gonna make sure I've got some really good ink. And then I'm going to do my best to mirror the way this stamp is over here. And to do that, what I find is a little easier sometimes is to just change the orientation of how you're looking at it. So I'm going to come in, and I know I've got most of that point almost all the way off. So I'm going to go ahead and put that down. Give that a good press. And clean that off. And then the only color that I have left to fill in the blanks is the Poppy Parade. So we're almost done with this. This is the most time-consuming part of the stamping, but it's also fun. I really enjoy working with this, and it's really not difficult, especially if you allow yourself to kind of play around with it and get a little bit used to how the stamp works. So the last thing, they're both going to be Poppy Parade, and I'm just going to ink up my stamp, and then I'm going to fill in the blank. And again, what's nice about this mat is I can move it around where I need it to be, and it's going to have plenty of room in there. And I'm just going to come in and this is an itty bitty little slice right now. And you're going to see that when I bring back the original and I show you this one, they definitely look different just because of the way that I angled some of the stamps. It's going to come back in over here and do the same thing. Just bring that in, put that down, and give it a nice push. All right. So here we have our design, which when you look at it, looks like a disaster. But I guarantee when we take off the masks and you see how we've created a field of tulips and a sky, that you are going to love the results. And masking is a really great technique to use, where we've done masking before, and I know we'll do it again, where we look at masking images, and you can create a lot of multi-dimensions when you do that. I'm going to move my piercing mat out of the way, and then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to peel off the masking. And I'm going to turn this over so we are not distracted. And you can see that we created just a beautiful scene that looks like a field of tulips. Okay, the next thing to do, and this is the kind of the second focus of this card, is we're going to create the Gatefold Slimline card. The first part that we did was very, very focused on the Tulip Fields stamp set and how to create a focal point like this. Regardless of what you would use to create a Slimline Gatefold card, you want to start, at least in this particular design, you want to start with a piece of cardstock for your focal point that is 3 by 8. So 3 by 8. The next piece that you want to cut, wish I had a piece of paper that, you know what I'm going to do? This little white stuff is distracting me. So I'm just going to put here. No, I'm not as distracted. We need a frame that's going to go behind this piece. And that frame, in the case of this card, is Poppy Parade. And obviously I chose that color because it's one of the ones that I used in the actual stamping. And because my piece that you're looking at started as 3 by 8, we want a piece that is going to act as a frame for that card, and it's going to be just a little bit wider and a little bit taller. So the piece that I'm going to use, and this is going to be my frame, and I'm going to attach these together right now. This is 3 1/4 inches by 8 1/4. So it gives you about 1/8 of an inch around all 4 sides. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start building my slimline gatefold. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put these 2 pieces together. And I'm going to use some Tombow glue for this. And one thing I'm going to do is, in addition to putting glue around the edges of the white, I'm going to end up cutting this in half. I don't want to put glue right at the halfway point, but I do want to put a little bit of glue at about this point, so that when I cut these that in half, there's going to be some adhesive right behind what was my piece of white that's going to hold it to that frame. And I'm just going to take this piece and put it on top of this piece and get it as centered as I can. And I'm going to put this to the side just for a minute. And actually, I want to pull that back just a tad, get it a little bit more centered. All right, there we go. Okay. So again, 3 by 8 was the piece that we used for the stamping and the blending. The Poppy Parade piece that I have here is 3 1/4 by 8 1/4. And that is going to be the frame that we're going to use. Now, let's talk about the slimline card base. And in the case of the card that I'm showing to you, that base is in the color of Calypso Coral. There are 4 pieces of cardstock that make up the card base. 2 of them are 3 1/2 inches by 8 1/2. These are very easy to cut out of a piece of standard cardstock, since standard cardstock is 8 1/2 by 11. So if this is the 8 1/2 inch side, just cut pieces so that they're 3 1/2. You're going to need 2 of these. The reason you're going to need 2 is one is essentially the back of your card, and the other is the piece that is going to go on the inside. I don't know how easy it is to see, but if you look really closely behind the white piece where I have the windmill stamped, there's another piece of Calypso Coral that is 3 1/2 by 8 1/2. So we've got the back of the card, we've got the front of the card. Now we need the pieces that create the sides of the card. And if you think about this, and you think about the slimline card, when this is all said and done, and you're ready to put this in an envelope, this card measures 3 1/2 by 8 1/2. Typically, when you do a gatefold card, you would cut a piece of paper for the entire length of the card when it's opened. Well, that would be 17 inches long. And we don't have paper that is 17 inches long. So we need multiple pieces to create this gatefold. The pieces that you need for the gatefold parts, you need 2 pieces. And again, I'm using Calypso Coral. So those 2 pieces are the same size and they measure 3.5 high, same height as the card itself. And the width is 5.25. And I'll explain that in a minute. So 5.25, 3.5, you need 2 of these. We are going to work on the sides first because the sides are going to get attached to the back piece. And the way the sides work is you are going to take your 5.25, you're going to put it into a scoring board and you're going to score that at 4.25. So it's going to have a 1 inch from the edge is where you're scoring. So 5.25, you're going to score it at 4.25. You're going to put your other piece in for your other side. Same thing. This is 5.25. You're going to score it at 4.25. For those of you who love math, like I love math, I'm going to share with you why we just did that. The piece of paper that will end up being the back of the card and will be the size of the card when it's finished, again, is 3.5 by 8.5. We just scored our gatefold and we scored it so that it is 4.25 inches, 4.25 inches long with that 1 inch overlap. Started at 5.25, but we've folded 1 inch over and we're going to end up with 4.25. Well, 4.25 is half the length of 8.5. So that's why we're creating this to be half the length, half the distance between the edges of the card. So take your pieces that you made for your sides and go ahead and score those and give them a good burnish so that they're going to lay flat. And then what we're going to do is we are actually going to miter these just a little bit because it will be cleaner when we attach these pieces, and we're going to attach them on either side. It will look cleaner if we've mitered them just a tad, and they don't need to be the same on both sides, but all I'm going to do is on the little flap, I'm just going to take a little bit off of each of these, and I'm going to kind of go in right at the corner. So there's one. And then I'm going to do the other one, and I may or may not get the angles the same. Doesn't matter. It's not the point. It's just mitering the ends so that we have, and we'll have a nice little corner to put on. All right. So this is going to be the back of the card. These are going to be attached so that they become the gatefold. We're going to attach one on one side, one on the other side. And this is going to give us a nice clean full 17 inches of paper that we're using to create this slimline gatefold. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to glue these on, and some people use tear and tape when they do this. I prefer to use the Tombow glue just so I have a little bit of forgiveness. I am making sure that when I put the glue on this piece, I'm not putting it really close to any of the edges. I don't want it to mistakenly ooze out. I want it to be nice and clean. And then I'm just going to bring that right to the edge and Just line it up the best that I can. And because these are both 3.5 inches high, they should go together really well. And you can just use your fingers and give that a nice little burnish. And when you open it up, when we eventually put the other piece, we're going to put another piece of Calypso Coral on the top of this. You won't see these little corners that we've put down. Now, this is a part where I really want you to make sure that you're paying attention. Inevitably, when you cut two pieces of cardstock and they're supposed to be the same dimensions, you're not going to get them exactly the same. And if you do, you are awesome. I tend to not get them exactly the same. But what I want to be able to do when I put these two cards together, two pieces together, and especially if you think about this, the center piece here is going to be where this center is going to come in. And the piece I haven't yet put on is going to be my opposite, my gatefold. I want those to meet in the middle. And in an ideal world, I want them to be flush against the sides. These are, but I had to do a little finagling. So you may have to do a little finagling. And if you do, it's normal. So what I'm doing here is this is the piece that I just put down. I'm holding this down. I'm going to hold that flap down. And I'm taking the piece that I haven't put on yet. I've got the fold that I will be gluing down. And I'm just pressing that against the piece that I've already glued down. And what I'm testing is, can I see anything over here? And in an ideal world, I would not be able to see anything. I can see a little itty bitty sliver. So I'm going to take this piece and I'm going to bring it to my cutting board, my trimmer, and I'm going to take the smallest sliver off of that piece. Now, if the opposite had happened and I had put them together and I had noticed that this was too long, I would just trim this off a little bit. And don't get overly quirky or, overly sensitive about it. It's just if you want to make it as perfect as you can, then that's what you do. And you can see now that that is completely flush. So I'm going to take this piece and I am going to just put that down. I'm going to do it a little differently though. I'm going to hold my flap down. I'm going to bring that piece in just like I did a second ago. And I'm going to line that up with that middle piece. It's hard to do when I'm looking at an angle. There we go. And I'm just going to push that down. And that's going to do a couple of things. It's going to make sure that these two flaps, the gate, when I open it up, that they're meeting in the middle. And it's going to make them align really, really well. So those are really nice. That's going to be a nice meeting in the middle. And you can see if you take the time to do that, when you finally put your piece on the top, it's going to meet in the middle really well. Okay. So the last thing we need to do to build this card base, we've got our back, we've got the gatefolds. We just need to kind of clean up the inside. And what's also interesting is when you start adding pieces, and especially when you start adding pieces that have folds, you're going to have to trim a little bit that second piece that you cut for the inside. This is 3.5 by 8.5. It's the exact same size as the back piece, but I have now attached my gates on the side and they have folds. So this fold is taking up a little space and I've aligned it on the edge. So this piece is not going to fit perfectly, dry fit it. And what that means is before you put any glue, see if you can fold it without it buckling. And I can't do that. So this is where, again, I'm going to bring in my little trimmer. And this time I'm not going to get crazy because I've got Calypso Coral on both sides. So I'm going to take off, actually, I'm going to take off a little bit more than that. I'm going to take off probably about I don't know, a 1/16 or so of an inch. And I'm doing that because I want to make sure that when I put this piece down, that it's going to lay nice and flat. So I'm going to put it back in here and I'm dry fitting it. I'm going to see, can I lay this down now when I have this piece in there completely? And the answer is no, it's still buckling. Okay, that's fine. That's why God invented a paper trimmer. I'm going to bring this back in, and I'm not worried that I may take off a little bit more than I might need to. It doesn't matter because the color of the background is going to blend. So no one's going to be the wiser when they see this card. And when I have enough that's been taken off, I'm going to be able to fold that down and it's going to lay flat. So now I know I'm good. I know that piece is going to work. And I'm just going to simply take that and I'm going to glue it in. Now, I've seen cards like this made where the flap, the gate piece that we put on the front is put on the back. And in my opinion, that is much, much harder, because what will happen is if you put the gatefold or the gates on the back, you are never going to have the right dimension to have that meet in the middle. You're going to have a gap, and I'll explain what I mean in a minute. So I've just put that piece down, and now I've got a really nice piece that it all looks like it's one card, and it's going to fold, things are going to meet. So I've seen it where these pieces where we attach to the middle of the card are attached to the back of the card. And then another piece is put behind them. When you do that, what happens is you get a gap. You're going to have a gap in the front when you lie those gates down. So it's much better if you put the gates on the inside and then line them up. So now I've got a nice gatefold slimline, and the rest is really decoration. We've got our front piece. We need to cut this in half, and we need to cut it in half so that when we put it on our gates, that the piece is going to meet in the middle. So that means we need to cut it in the middle. Well, let's do some math, and this is simple math. The red piece is the one that we care about cutting in half, because that is our frame. The red piece is, and all we care about is how wide is it? It is 8 1/4. We can test that by putting it right up against the ruler on our trimmer, and we're going to see that that is 8 1/4. Half of 8 1/4 is 4 1/8. So I'm going to put my piece into my cutter at 4 1/8. And this is another thing, just pay attention to this. And it doesn't matter what kind of design you have on the front. This is something I really recommend. This is 2 layers that have been glued together. I do not recommend cutting this like you normally do, meaning I don't recommend that you close the gate and you use your blade by going up. You could tear your paper. What I recommend is that you put your cutting blade about in the middle, doesn't matter, that you close the gate, you push that blade down, you cut, and then you bring it back up and you cut the other side. What that will allow is that where you've cut, you're going to get a nice clean cut, and you're not going to get any edges that look like they are frayed. So here we have our piece cut in half. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to bring that back to this card. And what I want to do is I'm going to do these one at a time. I'm going to take half of the card, one of the tops of the gate, and I'm going to glue that so that it looks like I'm really paying more attention to here to try to get it in the middle. I'm just going to glue that down, and then I'm going to glue the other one as well. So what amazes me is when you're done with a card like this and you look at it and you look at the card base, it just looks so clean, and it's meant to look clean. But there definitely are some steps involved in getting a card base, a slimline, for example, where you don't have 17 inches of paper that you can deal with, so that it all looks like it's done with pretty much one piece of paper. So I'm just looking at this edge, and I'm looking at the Calypso Coral on either side and trying to get that about as even as I can. And then I'm just running my fingers right along that edge to make sure that it's as flush with that edge as I can get it. And that looks pretty good. And then I have another piece that I'm going to match up. And if I match it up, in theory, it's going to come pretty much right in the middle. I'm going to take this piece and I'm going to match that up as well. And what I'm going to do on this side is I'm going to focus on the middle and put my two pieces together and then put it down. And what's nice about this is even if my edges all at the different corners are not perfect, you know, there's a little bit less of Calypso Coral over here. That's really not where the eye is going to go. The eye is going to go into the middle to give you that kind of visual of the design coming together. So there we have our gatefold. Now, one other thing that we can do is we can add a piece of cardstock into the middle of the card. And I just used a piece of basic white. This one is the same size as the focal point. It is 3 inches by 8. You can use any size you want. You can skip this part if you want to. It's really up to you. But before I do that, I'm just going to add a little bit of an image to that piece. And I'm going to use the small windmill that is in the set, and also some early espresso. I just thought early espresso would give the windmill a little bit of a feel of kind of being old, something that has been around for a little while. So I'm just going to ink that up. This is a really nice stamp. There's a lot of detail in it, and yet it really stands on its own. And then I'm just going to bring that in and stamp that down. And that will be a nice little image on the inside of the card. And obviously you can put any kind of sentiment or anything else that you might like. We are going to put a sentiment on the outside as well. And I'm just going to, while I'm here, I'm just going to go ahead and put this piece on the inside. What I really like about Slimline cards is the space that we have to do the creating of the design. And then because it is pretty big, we also have space for the sentiment and whatever else we want to put on the inside. So I'm just gonna lay that down and get it as centered as I can without going completely nutty. That's good enough. And that will be the inside of the card. To finish off the decorating, let me show you what I did. And some of the dies that are in this set are just amazing. Let me talk first about the fences. So you'll see in the finished card that there is a fence that is in the background, really made to kind of show where that horizon is. There are actually 5 dies in this die set that cut out pieces of fence. There are 2 different sizes of these dies. One does this triple fence and the other does a double post. And what's really nice is we have so many of these that you can run them through your cutting machine at the same time, and then you just get a bunch of them that you can use. So I used those, and I'm not going to do this completely, but I did want to tell you how I did this if you wanted to replicate the card. And what I did to attach these pieces is I didn't want to get an awful lot of glue on the fences because it would just make a real mess. So I put a little bit of glue on the ends, just a tad. And because I don't want it to be really thick, I'm also going to sort of stamp off, I'm gluing off, I guess, if that's a term, getting some of that glue off. And then I wanted to line it up right at the edge of that image. So I just brought that fence over, lined it right up at the edge. And because my horizon was done with Post-it notes, I'm pretty assured that that's going to be a nice straight line. And when I put the fence in, I don't know, it just adds a real dimension, I think. It really gives it some depth. And I think for those folks who might not know that it's meant to be a field of tulips, that when you put that fence in, it just helps clarify in your brain what it is that you're looking at. I purposely started the fencing on this side because I knew that when I got to the middle, it's not going to line up so that that fence is going to go all the way. But I figured out how far the fence would go, so I kind of measured. And on this one, I'm just going to put a little bit of glue on that last piece. And then I'm going to put glue on the second to the last. And when I glue that down, I'm actually going to open this up because I don't want to glue it accidentally to the other gate. Just going to put that down. And then what's nice about this is I can take some scissors and I can just cut off the piece that I don't want to show. And there I have my fencing for that side. Now, because I'm going to put my sentiment and focal point piece over the fencing on the left, I don't have to do as much. And what I decided to do there is I'm just going to use one of the triple pieces. And I'm going to do that exactly the way I did the other side. And these are pretty quick once you get them die cut. And they die cut really easily. I chose the early espresso on these as well. Again, I just thought it gave a little bit more of a realistic wooden view. I'm going to come in and start that one right at the edge again. Lay that straight down. And then I know I don't need much more because I'm going to be putting a sentiment and another windmill on the top of that. So I'm just going to put one more, and it doesn't matter how big or how small it is this time because a lot of it's going to get hidden. So I'm just going to bring that in. And my fingers are definitely getting gluey, but that's all right. And put that down. All right, so I've got my fence. And you can see, even with that, how much more depth it gives you. So let's talk about the final touches on this. What I wanted to do is I wanted to add a little bit of interest to the sky. You know, the sky it's kind of cool, but let's see what else we can do with it. Well, in the stamp set, there are some clouds. They're fun. They're different shapes. So I took those clouds and I decided that I wanted to use the same color that I had used on the ink blending, and I stamped those in Pool Party. And then I simply used the dies, because there are dies that cut out the clouds, and I cut out some clouds. So I've got my clouds. And I am just going to glue those directly onto my sky and give it a little bit more oomph, just because. Now you could put these on with dimensionals if you wanted to. Because this is going to be going into a slimline envelope, my suggestion is that you glue them directly, whether you use liquid adhesive or glue dots or whatever makes you happy. And I'm just going to go ahead and put those right on. And you can see I'm pretty much mimicking what I did down here on this one. So what have we got left? Well, we have a sentiment. And I brought back the Flowering Tulips stamp set. The Tulip Fields doesn't have any sentiments. So I brought back the Flowering Tulips. I stamped that using Rich Razzleberry onto a piece of white. And then I got one of my stitched rectangle dies and cut that out, purposely putting the sentiment over to the right because I knew I was going to add a windmill. I used a bigger rectangle die to give a little bit of a frame, and I used the Calypso Coral for that framed piece. And then the last piece that I'm going to add is the windmill. And this is the same windmill that I stamped for the inside. It is part of the Tulip Fields stamp set. I stamped that in Early Espresso. I used one of the dies and cut that out. And then I love watercolor pencils. So I used a couple shades of watercolor pencils, Daffodil Delight to do the window, and I used the basic gray to do the blades. Early Espresso, I did some fun shading on the side of the windmill, and then also Real Red for the door. And I just thought that kind of mimicked the colors that were in the card. So let me put these together really quickly, and we'll wrap this one up. And what I'm really hoping is that when you try this design, that you think about some other stamp sets, other themes that would just be perfect with this kind of slimline card. I was thinking that, you know, some really nice big flowers, just standalone flowers would look super pretty, because you could have a big flower in the middle that would open up, and then you could have some more flowers on the inside, maybe with a stamped off kind of saturation of the ink. All right, so I've just put my sentiment together. Now, very, very, very important, when you glue your sentiment on, make sure that you are not putting glue on half of your sentiment. You only want to put glue on the piece that's going to go, in this case, on the left gate that's going to open. So what I like to do is sort of eyeball where I'm going to put it, flip it over, And then I can see I shouldn't get any glue that way. So I'm just going to put some glue over on here. Don't need a whole heck of a lot. And I'm not going to get really crazy to try and get this exactly in the middle. I can kind of tell when it's in the middle. But what I am going to do, I'm going to make sure I can see that cloud. I am going to bring in my T ruler. I love my T ruler. And what that's going to do is it's going to make sure if I put this right up against the edge and I bring that down, I can make sure that my sentiment is straight. And I know you guys are thinking, oh, you're a crazy woman. Yeah, I probably am. But I just want to make sure if I can make that straight, and that looks pretty good, then I'm just going to push that down. And the last thing that I need to do is add my windmill. And this is where, if you're using these stamps, you can definitely make this your own. I am going to put a little bit of glue on the blades because I want them to stick down. And I'm just going to kind of figure out where I want that to go. And I'm purposely going to put the blades so that they go over my frame and make it look kind of interesting. And I can open this up. And then the last piece of bling. These are gorgeous, gorgeous, gorgeous. I love these butterflies. Just making sure that that's sticking down here. I'm going to grab a couple of butterflies and put them onto the card. And these are so much fun. And they come in 2 different sizes. Just going to grab it. It has adhesive on the back. Where I had that one little blurb before, I'm going to go ahead and just cover up my blurb. And I'll do one more big one. And I'm mimicking what I did on the other. I'm going to put that on the sentiment so it shows a little bit. And I'm going to do one little guy. And I've got this blank space. And I like to put a little bit of interest in a blank space. And we're going to turn him so he's flying that way. And there we go. So that's the card. And like I said, I really wanted to make sure that I did a couple of things. One is to show you how to use, or at least a way to use, this stamp that comes with the Tulip Fields. This is so much fun. I had a ball just putting all this together. And then the other is how to put together a Gatefold Slimline card that really looks like it is one piece. This really does. And I'm sure when you're making them and you're going to see just how clean they look. These are designed in size to fit in the new Slimline envelopes that Stampin' Up! Has. Come in 3 different colors. And I will show you that this will fit right in without any problem. And it's a great way to send these cards. As long as they're not super thick, you are not going to be paying for more postage. And they're just really fun. So I hope you've enjoyed this. I hope you give this a try. And I really think that you're going to find so many different uses for this kind of card. It just lends itself to a bunch of different occasions. And I really think these are pretty. I really, really do. And I'd love to see what you make. Thank you much. See you soon. Bye-bye.